Okay, great. Well, so recently I've read Man's Search for Meaning, and that it was just a great book, and it really made a big impact on me. And it made me think a lot about purpose and finding meaning in life. And I guess my question for you is, you've reached such a high level of success, being able to affect so many people. And so I guess my question for you is, once you've reached that level, how do you continue to find purpose in your life? Has it evolved? What would you say your purpose is right now?
This is a good question. Big question as well. I would say that I'll try to tackle that in a somewhat meandering fashion. So the first thing I would say is my approach to book writing, my approach to the podcast, my approach to the television shows I've been involved with has had a common thread that is very, very simple. People might even consider it simplistic, and that is, if I have a pain or a problem, or if I have a desire or a goal, I assume it is very likely that many other people have the same pains or problems or desires or goals. So most of what I do is scratching my own itch with the expectation that if I can figure out how to navigate any of those things well and take good notes and test a lot so that I can try the 100 things to filter down to the one or two that truly have a disproportionately good outcome, that is a straightforward way of adding value to the world and not just consuming oxygen and eating resources. So that is my general process, which is a way of backing into your question about what is giving me meaning right now. What is giving me meaning right now is looking at some of the traumatic experiences I had as a child, looking at the repercussions of that and the behaviors or thought patterns that are impossible to explain, that I still have in some cases, without looking in the rearview mirror and somehow metabolizing or integrating what happened to me that never had a sense of closure. And that then ties into a lot of the research I'm supporting related to treatment-resistant depression, related to long-term demoralization in, say, AIDS survivors at UCSF, and a lot of what I'm hoping to do with universities and other groups, including Johns Hopkins at the top of the list. And for me, then, it's assuming that right now, for me, that everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about. Like literally everyone. There is some degree of suffering, whether it's minor or major, chronic or acute, that everyone walking around you see. I mean, I'm looking out a high rise right now, down at the ground. So I see these hundreds of ants, which will soon be thousands and tens of thousands with South by Southwest, and assuming that every one of those people has some type of suffering, past or present tense, that is affecting how they make decisions, how they interact, how they view themselves. And if I can provide any tools whatsoever to decrease that suffering and to allow them to help other people who are suffering, then I view that as time very, very well spent. So that's how I'm thinking about it right now. But I'm not wedded to that, and I think it can fluctuate. I do think the filling the void chapter in the 4-Hour Workweek, which is probably the most neglected yet most important chapter in some respects in the entire book, towards the tail end, ties into a lot of the observations that you would read in Viktor Frankl's book, and books for that matter. And so there are certainly complementary chapters and books that you could digest, but when in doubt, I would say, instead of trying to save the world, look at how you can save yourself or help yourself in some fashion. And by doing something that seems very selfish on the surface, you're actually being very practical, because you are scratching your own itch in such a fashion that you're not purely speculating. You're dealing with the real world, even if it is limited to you, which I can pretty much guarantee you, if it's any type of suffering, if it's any type of desire, there's a very, very high likelihood, probably 100%, but let's just call it very high likelihood, that there are thousands at a minimum and probably millions of people in the world with some close cousin of that, if not the exact same thing in their daily experience. So that's how I currently am thinking about it. But I should also say that there's no one right answer here. Right? So your meaning could be playing music and brightening people's days for 60 minutes or 30 minutes when you get on stage to play your set, because you've carefully crafted this art to change the emotional state of people who are sitting within 50 feet of you. That, and if that gave you meaning, and certainly I think that is meaningful. I think that's very meaningful. Even though other people who might sit on the sidelines and judge, which is usually the people who judge, by the way. It's not the people in the arena who are actually scraping their knees and getting things done, but the peanut gallery on the internet and on the side, criticizing you, saying that you should be spending your time a different way. There is no should. We're not dealing with the natural laws or physical, hard scientific laws that are sort of I mean, we can get into a conversation of objectivity, but let's just call them objective truths for the sake of this thought exercise. We're dealing with your perception of what matters. And your perception of what matters, I think, though you should listen to other people, and I encourage you to talk to other people about how they think about it, your perception of what matters is your perception of what matters. And you can own that, and you can consider it valid. I would say that it's helpful as you're walking around in the world as a perceiving machine to perhaps read or listen to certain books like Awareness by Anthony DeMello would be a one recommendation that I would have. But I'll stop talking in a second because this is a long answer, but I can't give the meaning of life, but I can tell you where I think my most leveraged point of focus is for creating meaning as I feel it today. And it's not a purely cognitive exercise, I should say. It's not that I think about it and sit down with a spreadsheet, although with some of the investments and donations I make in science, I do think about the downstream effects of certain landmark studies, for instance. So I do use an analytical side to it, but the analytical is more, in my case these days, for the execution. So I really try to feel with what do I get a whole body yes to that makes me and other people feel better, or that in some fashion solves a problem or helps me or others to get what they're hoping to have, or gives people hope, then enables them in some fashion. What is the feeling that I want, right? So instead of saying, how do I find meaning, say, what is the feeling I hope to have when I find meaning? Or sort of an antecedent, or if you can kind of diagnose what you need by looking at the symptoms, the side effects, which would be how you would feel. Like if you were doing something really meaningful, what would that give you that you don't currently have? And then try to map that as you're talking about different ideas, different topics, different ways you could spend your time. Like, when does that feeling come up? And then if you use that as one criterion for deciding where you might want to focus to create meaning, then you can use the analytical to build a plan for executing on everything we just described. But that's long answer to a short question. Hopefully that wasn't completely word salad. Did any of that make any sense whatsoever?
That was incredible, and thank you so